Welcome to episode 3 of Underexposure, a podcast for creatives by creatives, hosted by Ian Harrington, Manny Aqua,
Hey.
and me, Kerry Helton. So, as professional creatives, at some point in your career and our careers, we have to deal with our clients. And that can be a very positive experience, or that can be a very negative experience, depending on lots of variables and depending on you as a professional creative. So Ian, Manny, and myself just wanted to talk a little bit about some of our really great experiences with clients and some of our not so good experiences with clients, and processes and things that we've put in place to make that process go a little smoother with clients. So yeah, I mean, I know I've had some just bad encounters with clients, bad experiences, some really positive experiences too, though. There are some clients that, if I contact them or they contact me, I will pick up that phone any time of day to take a job with that client. But Ian, have you had?
Yeah, I think that's something that certainly is a misconception when you go to form your own business or do your own thing, is that all of a sudden you're going to be getting like the best clients. And even with like what we'll touch on, like sometimes the best plans, you still got to cut through the shit a little bit to get to the gold. Like you're going to be faced with these clients that have a different mentality of how they want to get the job completed. And I think this is a really great subject because, like Kerry's mentioning, we're going to face this if you're going to become a professional in whatever career, creative, you got to get paid.
And yeah, it's part of the growth ladder.
Yeah, someone's got to pay you. So lots of cool stuff to talk about.
And that's one of the biggest struggles in the beginning, is that as you move along in your career, you kind of have the opportunity to pick and choose who you work with based on what criterion you have for good clients, or based on your connections and contacts and the ways you get to those clients. But when you're first starting out, you don't have a ton of options, especially if you're trying to make a living and you're trying to get paid for what you're doing. You almost have to take what you can get. But I think personally, and from my experience in doing this, I think that's a vital period where you learn a lot about who you want to be in your profession, and what your expectations are of clients that you take on. But it's in the beginning there are some not so great clients maybe that if you want to get paid for that work, you have to take on.
Definitely. So what are some things that you think we should consider when evaluating that first client, Kerry? So,
and like you said, Manny, evaluating that client, that I think that's something in the beginning I didn't do a lot of, right? It was like, oh, you want to work with me? That's
You're
awesome.
Gonna pay me to do what?
Like,
let's go. You want to jump into it right away, right?
Yeah, man. I wasn't worried about evaluating a client. I was worried about getting that job booked and making an awesome end product and then getting paid for it.
Getting that dough.
Yeah, getting that money, bro. But yeah, just researching a little bit about the client, I think is a great first step. Who are they? Are they a product or a service based client? What kind of relationship do they have with their audience and their customers? I think those are great initial things to kind of explore when you're first evaluating.
Yeah, totally. You got to look at the background of who you're going to work for, and like we're saying, when you first start, maybe you don't have those choices, but doing that little bit of research is probably going to save you quite a bit of headache that you can avoid, even if it's not the greatest client. I think there's a difference between a unwell paid, a gig where you're not going to get paid well, and a bad client, right? Like it's not. We're not talking about a bad client equating to less money, because you can get a really good gig and not get paid a lot, depending on what you're looking to do. We're talking about people that maybe don't respect your craft, don't respect your time, what else? Like there's so much stuff.
I feel like we've been, yeah, like bad client, good clients. I feel like we've been saying bad clients and good clients, but at the same time, I think you've mentioned this before, Ian, that it's not necessarily a bad client or a good client, right? It's how we kind of take that client in the beginning, like that opportunity, and how we mold it. So you were telling me a little bit more about this. Can you touch
Yeah, I
on this?
think you're right. It's like molding is a really good analogy.
Because we just want to label right away. Like we're just labeling immediately, right? But it's not a bad client necessarily. Like you have the opportunity.
If you can get a client that is in a subject matter that you like and they're willing to pay you, I think already you've established that this could possibly be a good client, right? Like you enjoy the subject matter, you see eye to eye that payment will be made for your services. What you're now faced with doing is almost, molding that person into or brand into somebody that's going to be, or a relationship that's going to be mutually beneficial.
And I think all when I think about my bad clients, right, or my nightmare clients, is as hard as it is to do sometimes, I can attribute everything that made that person a bad client or a nightmare client back to something I did or didn't do with that client, right? So in terms of, like you're saying, molding that client, if there are things that start to go off the rails with the relationship between you and the client, or something about the job that is amiss, I've always been able to point back to a something I did or didn't do with that client. And most times it's didn't do, right? I didn't put a parameter in place to prevent this thing from going off the rails, or I didn't communicate well enough with the client to make them understand the value of my time, or something of that nature, right? So again, I totally agree. It's all about kind of molding the relationship with that client. But there are things that you have to do in order to ensure that this is going to be a successful venture with a client.
And there are things that we have to do to actually get those clients. So it's like, how do we get those
Right.
clients
And I
first?
was kind of leading to what we were talking about the other day, and this like law of attraction kind of mindset, where
Right.
if you're putting out usually what you're going to get back. And I don't mean that in the sense of necessarily the law of attraction. I'm talking about what we're talking about here in clients, and what if you're putting out good work, you're probably going to attract.
It's that
Yeah,
karma.
you're gonna. It's like creative karma. Like you're gonna attract
Yeah.
somebody that likes good work. So it's all rounded in what we're saying already, that it comes back to you. When we say good client versus bad client, it's not like they're an enemy, but their result is based off of you as well. It's an internal thing that you got to work on and to get those good clients.
Yeah, and consistently putting out the type of work that those clients are looking for. So I guess it really is. You kind of have to start with what does your ideal client look like, right? What kind of clients are you after? Are you going after really polished brand, lifestyle driven clients? Are you going after a corporate conference, type of client? What does your ideal client look like, right? And then you can start tailoring the creative output to kind of match what they might be looking for. So if you are going after that lifestyle brand client, the more work that you can tailor to what they're looking for, and the more consistently you can put it out and then try to get that work in front of them, the better your odds are going to be for landing that client.
Yeah, and that also, like to touch on your point, it's like producing some spec work, just like instead of always just working for clients or just doing the paid work. How about we get together creatively and produce some good spec work that could land bigger clients, or that can actually land a big campaign project that gets us all paid, so to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Aspirational work.
Aspirational work, inspirational and aspirational.
Yeah, because
Both.
you're right. Like you're not going to start off shooting things for like Nike. That's just not how it works. But if you put out those efforts and that creative karma into the world, like, hey, I can make this and I didn't get paid, you may get hit up later on by somebody else that wants to hire you then for those services. Again, just putting out what you want to get back. And also, that's what I was thinking of, not taking jobs that you're not going to enjoy. That's really easy to say, but I think it relates back to this concept of like creating the nightmare client. If you don't like going to work, you're going to hate your boss. But if you love the things that you're doing, you're going to love the people you interact with. So take things as they can when you're first starting. Be really careful at what niche you put yourself in, because you're now you're creating your work for you, and that can be dangerous.
And I'm a big fan of chasing the opportunity too, right? Like I've got a sales background, so if there's an opportunity somewhere, it's hard for me not to capitalize or execute on that opportunity, because that's just kind of my conditioning. So that's something I've had to work really hard on, is to not jump at the opportunity if it's not congruent with what I want for myself professionally, right? The ability to say no, and learning how to say no
respectfully,
in a way that, respectfully, tactfully, professionally, in a way that's not going to damage the relationship that I've come to build with that person, right? Because at the end of the day, in my opinion, and people feel differently about how they interact with clients, but for me, and especially with a sales background, from correspondence one, I am trying to build a relationship with that person. And the stronger that relationship is, the more kind of room to maneuver and to execute that I have, in my opinion, right? So if I'm going to say no to that person, I want to do it in a way that isn't going to damage that relationship that I've been working to build, because there may be an opportunity in the future that is congruent, that I am totally open to work with them on, or whatever, or they may be able to refer me to a person who is my ideal client. So again, it's about recognizing those opportunities, but if it's an opportunity that doesn't work for you necessarily, knowing how to say no in a way that's not going to damage the relationship.
Yeah, don't just ever like tell someone to fuck off, right? Don't burn bridges. Like, no, guys, don't burn bridges. Like, oh, you don't want to work with me? Well, fuck you. Like, no, no, that's not the way. Like, learn communication skills and learn to practice that professional and respectful tone. And it could be a respectful decline. Like, this isn't a good fit for me. And you deserve someone that could be a perfect fit for you,
And I'd like to chase that down the rabbit hole a little bit, Manny.
What's up?
So why do you think somebody would react that way?
To what?
If somebody was, if there was an opportunity and the client either was, for whatever reason, they didn't align with this project, and they were like, the creative was ready to burn the bridge, mm-hmm. right? If they were like, nah, fuck you, or whatever, why do you think that would happen?
Does that mean there's a lot of things that could happen? It could be they're disrespectful about, like, they're not even respecting your craft. There's right. A lot. I mean, you guys add to that. I mean, what else could there be?
I would say it's more fear based. Not having this mindset of what Kerry is saying of like building a relationship. Right, you're just looking at your client as a means to an end of
like, a transaction, like a
right.
Transaction.
Like these are people too, and relationships need to be, molded. And even if you don't enjoy a relationship, you're a professional, and at that point, you can then either pass it on to somebody else, which I think we've mentioned before. That's a pro move right there. Like, you pass work on, you're not getting paid, but you're going to get paid back later in the sense of like whoever you referred that to, whatever. It just looks so much better than even saying like not interested. You know that
Has
it's like,
anyone
Mm-hmm.
of course you're not interested. You're shooting like pictures of a fucking trash can or something. Like, sorry, this bores the shit out of me. But I know a guy that's great at shooting trash cans, and
has anyone had that happen to where like you respectfully declined someone and then like they came back months later saying, hey, you know what, let's work or something like
that
we
definitely that's
Absolutely.
another outcome that happens where
Absolutely.
like you've actually put yourself into like a higher position by saying no, and you've gained more respect, and so they're like, well, this guy has a
Right.
standard. You know, it's like that honor
Yeah.
code, and they are not going to go below that standard. And you know, all right, he's probably worth his salt. Like, give him the money. You know,
And jumping back to what Manny was saying a second ago, I believe, Manny, the reason why people might get fired up like that is because they take it personally. You know,
it's just business.
for whatever yeah, man, for whatever reason they feel like either offended or attacked, you know, by an action from a client or a comment or whatever, and they take that personally. And again, what we've talked about before is, you know, as a professional, you have to understand that this is a business relationship. You know, they're not attacking you personally. They're whatever it is, it has to do with your business and not with you as an individual, right? So if you have an issue where you find yourself burning bridges a lot of times, do a quick evaluation and check to see if am I taking this to heart, you know, am I taking these things personally? And if you are, you know, maybe try to start creating some separation there so that you can detach a little bit and kind of keep the emotional response out of the equation. But again, hallmarks of a professional, right?
Yeah, because that can definitely tear the business down quickly if you cling on to those emotions and bring them onto that aspect of your life. You know, business and personal
man.
got to be separate.
I think it's aligned with, you know, that mindset we were saying before. Are you ready to take on high level clients? Like, you need to be looking at yourself and your business and your creative abilities before you even get out there and say, I'm ready to do this work, because people are out there ready to give you the money, but you need to be ready to fulfill their needs. Because if
The good clients work with the pros,
yeah,
right?
like they're out there, and the bad clients work with the, you know, not so pro yet. But and that's not true all the times. You know, like I've definitely had experiences where I've worked with clients that ended up not being my ideal fit, and that I think strengthened my abilities, like we were saying before, to negotiate or work my way out of a situation, or, you know, tie up a budget. There's definitely some advantages to dealing with those bad clients, but the overall goal is to, you know, migrate to only working with good clients for the rest of your career, because that's what, you know, makes it a career.
That in a perfect world is like the best way to say it, right? Like, yeah, let's only work with good clients. But how to avoid the bad clients? Well, make the bad clients avoid you. Think, act, and speak as a professional. You know, this can actually make bad clients avoid you and you enter the pro realm. So it's like, how do I only attract the good clients, so to say, as I mentioned, you know?
And Manny, we can even, so if we can create bad clients, which we can do, you know, we can take a perspective like good client, and based on the way we handle that client, can turn them into a nightmare client or leave openings for them to become a nightmare client by, you know, not putting processes and procedures in place to make sure the transaction runs smoothly. But if that's true, then I believe it's also true that we can take a bad client and with the processes that we implement, turn them into a good client, right? Or at least put the boundaries in place to keep them into being a manageable client, if not a great client.
Right, like having at least a set process for the actual client discovery phase, right? That's how like your filtration system, or as some people would call it, that you need that in place to weed those out.
Yeah, and they'll weed themselves out. You know, if they can't comply with your processes, or if your pricing is out of their range, they will go away. They'll find somebody else who is more flexible in those areas, or who charges less, and chances are the quality, you know, it's not going to be your work, right? It's going to be somebody else's. So, but to your point, Manny, they'll filter themselves out too. And
There's also good tips. I was researching online, like how to avoid bad clients and get a little more insight on this. And I came across Chris Do on Instagram, and he has a good post where he talks about like 7 steps of avoiding how to avoid bad clients. And he mentioned like the avoid the commitment phobic, which is like the client that has the phobia towards commitment. And it's like when you ask for the 50% up front and then there's silence, right? It's just like, come on, man. Just right then and there, signal. Tink, 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 right? There's another one. When they mention work as like belittling descriptors. So example, like it's just, or it's something simple, you know, a quick photo shoot. It's not hard, or something like that. You know, that's also another sign where you're leaning towards a bad client, right? What about the promiser? Bartering for the low price, always the promiser. I can get you exposure, future opportunities. Hey, I can get you some referrals.
It's so
What
sad
about
how
those?
many times I've heard of like all of those people, which is crazy because
There's
they
also,
definitely run in a circle.
yeah, it's just, it's ongoing. And there's this, the flatterer, right? He compliments your expertise. It's like, oh, your work is so great, this and that. I love the way you do this. But when it comes down to business, he dismisses your thoughts or everything you got to say.
Yeah.
One last one off
No, go
those
for it.
points. It's the family guy, the incredibly talented family. Oh yeah, I know someone who could do it for less. You know, it's like, man, stop, get out of here with your
Oh my
bullshit.
God.
Those are all great signs. You know what I mean?
Yeah, those are definitely, I mean, just, you know, I feel like one of those important ones was um, the promiser, was
The
it?
promiser.
Yeah, like
Yeah. The
the
barterer.
barter, or when you get to a level that you're dealing with a professional client, you're now not only selling your skills creatively, but all those processes we talked about. And one of those would be, like we're saying, filtering them out through some kind of form, you know, on your website or whatever. But the other, like more in-depth details are those proposals and the contracts. Because if you know, get the inkling that somebody's not ready to sign a contract, or that they may not be on the same level of professionality as you are as a client, you have to have those things like succinct on your end to protect you. And that may not be a super creative thing for, you know, people in this world, but it's really vital to protect yourself, and also, you know, make sure that those interactions are protected.
And that proposal is the primary tool that will allow you to combat all 7 of those, you know, things that you were just talking about, Manny. That is your ultimate filter, right? That for a specific client, to ensure that they are a good client, right? Or a good fit for you as a creative professional. And that proposal, it's on us again, though, as professional creatives, to make sure that we hit all of the high points in that proposal that are going to protect us, you know, as creatives, and make sure that that client's a good fit.
Yeah, because you're gonna get people, I think, that just say some things, and then when it comes to action, they behave a completely different way. And that proposal protects you from coming to that point, because you've laid out exactly what's going to be fulfilled, how it's going to be fulfilled, who's going to get paid, hopefully a timeline, and then you're going to both sign on it. And, you know, your word is bond. And, you know, I would look into legal professionals looking into whatever you create contract wise, not your proposal. But there are some really great proposal templates out there, which will certainly filter out bad or not as professional clients.
having that proposal laid out again is going to protect you from basically all of those variables that could be little windows that are left open to where the nightmare client can kind of sneak in. So that proposal is going to protect you up front from all of those variables, and then the contract writes it in stone. So you and the client have agreed to those parameters and those deliverables, that scope of work, all of these things that you've covered in the proposal and now the contract, and those protect you as the professional, and it gives the client clear expectations of what you're going to provide, what service you're providing, what items, what finished products you're going to deliver, right? And that also protects you in the future. So this is a situation I know we've all encountered, and as a creative, things change sometimes with how the client views the work or how you're viewing the work as you're creating it. And down the line, say they want a different edit of a video, for instance, and instead of this one long video, they want that, but they'd also like you to break it down into 3 30-second videos too, right? And
something quick and easy.
Right. Just, it's real easy. It'd only take a second, but honestly, it wasn't covered in the proposal. It's not in the contract. And instead of you having to be the asshole that's like, well, I mean, I could do that, but I'm gonna have to charge you this, this X additional amount for that. And, it's going to take a couple of days. Instead of you having to do all that, explaining and kind of catering to that client, you can simply refer back to the proposal and the contract and say, hey, this actually wasn't a part of our proposal and it wasn't in the contract. So if you let me, I'll drop a quick amendment to that or whatever, and then you're protected, right? So you don't have to be the asshole. You can point back at the process and be like, we didn't cover that.
Right.
So I can shoot you a quote on what that'll cost. It won't be a major deal. We can definitely get it handled over the course of the next couple of weeks, but you're protected, right?
Yeah, and not clients, creatives at an amateur stage or when starting out were very, I mean, even myself, it was like you're very looking at contracts and talking about contracts like there's some taboo or some crazy thing that it's like, oh, if I send that to my client, they're gonna like freak out, or they're like, I shouldn't do that. It's like, no, man, you need to protect yourself because there's people out there that are, there's not everyone, right? But there are people out there that can do harm legally and you can put yourself in a bigger hole just because you weren't prepared, and you have to do the legwork prior. That's what Kerry's saying. If you put that extra legwork in, you will be way better set in a situation like this.
And how does that affect the optics of you as a creative professional? If you're working with a client and you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants throughout the course of the transaction, how much better does it look for you to fire off a proposal to that client within the first, few interactions that you have with them? They're going to look at you as, okay, this guy isn't playing around. He has a grasp of his craft and, his field, and he's going to execute well.
If you tighten up your proposal, it's such a good advantage of even being like.
That's what I wanted to ask. It's like, what do they have? What does the proposal have? Walk us through real quick.
I'd say like, your proposal, even as a amateur or somebody just starting off, can elevate the level of how you're perceived. Like you can actually not be, quote unquote, as good as you say you are compared to what you show on paper. And if you look organized, I think one of the big things is communication that we're talking about. If you can, write well, and by that I mean take your idea and put it onto paper and transmit that to somebody so that they get your idea, that's a skill in itself just to do that. And it can land you that bigger client because hell, I mean, if you can do that, you more than likely can make some kind of video or, other digital asset. It's all about exchanging of ideas. So I think, having an organized proposal with strong language, make sure you're using proper grammar. It sounds so silly in the creative world, but like, maybe these aren't creatives too. Maybe you're working with corporate level people and they really look at that. And then numbers, I think, be really cognizant of how your numbers align. This could be a whole other podcast just talking about that, like dollar amounts, making sure it looks clean and like the layout. I'm not a design person. I know Kerry has that background and Manny with photography, and in the sense of how those line up into your proposal. Those are also vital. Like there's a style in your proposal. Your proposal represents you, at that point. So yeah, it needs to look branded. It needs to look dope if you're going for that, that cool brand. If you're going for, I mean, you could have various templated proposals
and tailor it to that brand. This is very similar to a job application or an interview process where
resume,
you want
right?
to, you want to make sure that brand or business knows that you want to work with them. It's not just, even though I totally recommend some templated proposals to work from, but tailor it to that client. Make sure you're assertive about the fact that you want to work with them. It's not just if you do, that is, but it's not just you're another number in the file. No, I am here to work with your brand for these reasons, but and also to Ian's point, make sure it's branded, make sure it's consistent with your other marketing materials, with your website, make sure there's that brand consistency, right? You want it to match all of those things. But again, you want it to be targeted at that client.
Yeah, that there's I would say artificial intelligence or programs that are out there, and this podcast in no way or means is sponsored by any program or business, and we want to, but I found talking about proposals, there's this like proposal builder, betterproposals.io, man. Like that thing is pretty incredible how with a couple clicks you can win more business and get paid faster with like a whole integrated platform of delivering your proposal with like really beautiful designs and easy to use, created in minutes instead of like actually going through the whole process or the hours of, there's a lot that goes into it, and please get legal advice and do all that legwork. But there are programs out there that can help put you in a better position for, free or little money,
Bro, that's the name of the game too, man. Automating the fucking boring, the make your eyes bleed administrative stuff, because I mean, again, as a creative, it is not my favorite part of what we do, but it's vital. And again, if you want the ideal client or your dream clients, you have to have these in place so that they don't, disintegrate into that nightmare client that you don't want to work with. So again, it's the onus is on us to
still think outside the box, even with your proposal, right?
For sure. Yeah. How can you get
memorable.
that attention? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I think like we're saying too, just like it has to be pertaining directly to that client. So do some research before, it's so easy just to Google somebody, like any brand. If you get, hit up for a brand project, just look at you can go so deep as looking what they're earning, so that you can get a better idea of what your pricing should be. Because if you're the one that's putting out a low number and then you sign on that is on you. That is on you 100%. You've left money on the table. But if you've, done some research and you've figured out, well, these guys can probably afford this, and then you overbid, which I would definitely recommend, not all the time, but like favor your creative abilities, and also favor the possibility that somebody wants to pay you money more than you think. Worst that's going to happen is they're going to tell you to go down, or if you're professional enough, you may have a method of negotiating that's beyond those terms. But yeah, I think the research is boring stuff, but it's what leans in and gets you those higher bids won.
Yeah, and the mousetrap that is underbidding, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And again, that's something everybody's done. I've completely underbid before and found out later too. Like just I don't, just through the grapevine, or somebody on the team is like, dude, we had money left over, and been like, fuck, what, and it just takes that experience to get to that point. But don't make it a regular thing, because then you're stuck. Then you're the cheap guy. You don't know. Nobody wants to be the cheap guy.
Pinned down at that price point, it translates into retail too. If you're the brand or business that's always giving discounts, you become the discount guy. You become people
subconsciously label you.
Yeah, they associate your brand with discounted or with lesser than, and that's not where you want to be. Plus, you're leaving money on the table, like you said, and you get pinned down at that lower price point, and then all of the deals that you could have had and could have made more money. So not the deficit, not zero, but in the black, making more money from those projects. You've left that all on the table to be wiped away.
Yeah, or even worse, when you're trying to make that next step to actually get paid more, you're kind of the cheaper guy, and you're going to have a harder transition to actually, take that next step. So it's a tough battle to price yourself low. But before we talk about pricing to a client, we have to first learn how to sell to a client, right, Kerry?
Yeah, I mean, and selling to a client, again, for me is all about the building of a relationship with a prospective client. So first, how do you get to those clients? I think that's a big question. We've all kind of used different methods, I think, to generate leads for clients, or to get into contact with the people that we'd like to work with, ideally. And for me, a lot of that has been my own personal network in the beginning, identifying channels that I wanted to work in specifically, and then reaching out to contacts that I had in those channels. And then eventually, more word of mouth spreads and things like that. But or running ads and getting real clear about who that ideal client is, and targeting those types of clients through ads. But in any case, once you've gotten in front of the client, you begin that process of kind of selling the client and trying to, because we're always, as creatives, we're always selling our service, our products. And once we get in front of those clients, how do we begin the relationship? How do we begin the process of winning that business?
I was just thinking of something. It's like right now we're talking about getting into the process of selling to clients. Mm-hmm. That term, the terminology of selling, it fucks shit up in our head.
Yeah.
Think about it. We hate being sold to, right? So it's also like, it's like starting the therapy to the client. It's like beginning the therapeutic analyze session, or you're trying to find out now what this diagnosis is, to then prescribe your client your solution, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of thinking, oh, I have to sell, it's like, wait a second, listen to your client, ask those questions, because you don't go to a doctor and he's like, all right, you need a penicillin and this and this and this, and you're out the door. Get the fuck out. No. He asks you questions. Where does it hurt? Blah, blah, blah. Gets your diagnosis. And then after a good analysis and assessment, gets you on your way with the appropriate doses and prescription, right? So I think we should doctor our own way to sell to clients into a more, let's now converse and talk to these people that are also human and they want to get something done, and creatively. Let's do it that way.
Yeah, speaking to somebody in a nurturing kind of method is certainly better than being sold to. And I think you just come off as desperate, thirsty. like chill. Like it's like you're gonna get paid, and like don't like I think that's what we're getting to. It's like it's about getting the money, and even when there's things that are underbid, and like it's not that they're hiding it from you. It's not like these people are trying to get you at the lowest dollar more than likely, but they need to be molded and spoken to like a human and understand that I'm here to fulfill the needs you have in the creative realm.
They don't know your profession. Yeah, they don't know your profession, right? They don't fully understand your profession. They know you make videos, they know you make stunning websites, they know you make awesome logos and beautiful photography, but they don't really understand your profession and what it takes to actually do those things. So you have to educate your client as well, and that's part of the relationship building process.
And that's why they're talking to you in the first place, is because they have a need, they have a pain point. There's an area of their business where they need help from a professional to address and to create a resolution for an issue, a pain point that they're having. So, in my experience, and this is almost always the case, is people want to tell you about those things. They want somebody else who has some understanding, right? They want somebody else who has some understanding to be able to shoulder some of that burden and do some of the legwork to help them create a resolution or a solve to the problem that they have. So again, when speaking to a client, when trying to nurture that client, ask them about that pain point and let them tell you how you can help. They're gonna tell you what you need to do in order to meet their need or meet their expectation. And that's part of the nuance and the beauty of this process is, like Ian was saying, it's not cars salesman-y. It's relationship building, and it's hearing them out and letting them tell you how you can be of service.
But what would be an example of a response of a car salesman creative that if a client comes to him and says, "Hey Kerry, how you doing? I need a new logo." What would that response of that creative be?
Right off the bat, this is it. It's me instead of you. So if somebody was like, "Kerry, I hear you make great logos. What can you do for me?" I'd be like, "Well, I've made logo for and I've made logo for this company, and I've had, I've gotten awards, and me. That's what a car salesman would do. A creative professional who wants that fucking business might say something to the effect of, "Well, let's start with who is your brand? Introduce me to your brand so I can get an idea of who I'm making a logo for." Their answer would probably be something to the effect of, "Well, I'm not sure how to introduce you to my brand." And that's where you get to start being the professional, because you can say, "Oh, do you have, a brand look and feel? Do you have some guidelines that determine the messaging for your brand?" And they're like, "Nope. What you've just done is created pain points now that they weren't even aware of, that you can help them address, which is opening up doors to new business with that client." And you're 3 minutes into the conversation.
Yeah. You just opened a can of whoop ass.
Absolutely. For sure.
I think too, like while we're talking on that subject of like building this relationship, and while it is pretty hands-on, that is another method or another approach that can also somewhat be templatized to a degree. That's a form that they fill out, and just the questions that Kerry's saying, like, "Tell me a little bit more about your brand," because I mean, it is exhausting to hear about somebody's brand and their baby and all this over and over. So what you want to do is be empathetic to that, but in a mechanized way, so that you can intake the information and give them what they want to hear genuinely, but in a efficient manner, because you're going to get a lot of people that are going to tell you their, like Kerry and Manny are saying, it's like people just want to tell you about their brand and they think it's so cool. So be prepared to intake all that information, use it as well as you can to give them the right answers, and hopefully open up a couple of doors for you to give your suggestions and plant the seed of, "Hey, I got some other ideas that could benefit the brand and maybe give you some more
Yeah,
dollars in your
some good
pocket.
questions to ask would be like, what's driving this request? What business objective are you trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
What's getting in the way of this?
Mm-hmm.
What challenges or obstacles do we need to overcome? How can we overcome these obstacles? And just finding out those things. And once you start asking those questions, the more they open their doors to like, oh, this person actually really wants to help and can really provide a
Right.
professional assessment to what I need. And then you hit them like at the end. You basically summarize your information. You capture their goals. What's the gap? You have a solution and you have the metrics to do it. You just follow up with your. I'll follow up with a bidder proposal on so and so date that reflects the scope of the budget that we discussed. And does this sound right to you? Once you have this conversation, it's going to be a natural thing.
Absolutely. And this is kind of a self-evaluation part of it too when it comes to selling a client. I think what works best for you as an individual. So again, Ian mentioned having that kind of questionnaire in a format where you can shoot it over to a person and just get that raw data, right? And that makes it very easy to work with in your process internally from an administration standpoint. But when it comes to selling a client, for me, I take the phone call route, and that's just me personally as the person I am in my creative element. Once I get that person on the phone, for me that's an and also, Ian, I may be kind of off base here too, because we talked a little bit about our processes personally, and I think that questionnaire was just kind of a first. It's one of the first things that you send out.
Yeah, but I think you're on the right track though, in the sense of like I actually am not a great phone like direct conversation person, and what you're saying too is like there are various methods to sell, and it should be organic to your personality to a degree, because then it truly, right, it truly shows you or shows the client like who you're going to be interacting with. Because if you come up fake later on, you're going to have to act that way the entire time, and and that leads down that path of creating the nightmare client, because now you're faking who you are truly. Like I think that's a really good point to make, of like, sell what you feel is comfortable in a professional manner, because it really resonates. It just feels truthful.
I can attest to that.
When you
being genuine, it makes you memorable, even like just by being genuine. You don't necessarily have to say some smart shit or like do something crazy. If you are a genuine person and you reflect that little thing can be the memorable thing also that you do.
Yeah, and people, especially now, can sniff out things that aren't authentic.
Yeah.
And if you are not being authentic with a client, at its base, you're a fucking liar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Straight up, bro.
Yeah. I just like how quickly
At its base.
Serious. You're a
At its
fucking liar.
base, that's how a client's gonna think of you, man. If you're being inauthentic and you're playing a role and they see through that, you have been dishonest with that person. That you have been lying. And if who wants to work with a liar? You know what I mean?
Nobody
People
wants
want to work with people they like, people they're comfortable with, people who are honest and upfront with them. That's who people want to work with. People don't want to work with liars. It reminds me of the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. I'm pretty sure that's the name. Yeah, the book is called Influence. So when I was I did a few years at the Art Institute here in San Diego, and I was in the advertising program. And one of the professors there turned me on to Robert Cialdini in this book, Influence. And it's just not only a fantastic read, but it covers the 7 principles of influence that you can use when you're in a selling type of situation. But some of those the liking principle is one that he covers in that book. And it basically says that people want to work with people they like. And the way you get somebody to like you is to make them feel good about themselves. So again, it's taking the focus off of you and putting it on them. Another principle he covers is the principle of reciprocity. If you front load value in an interaction with somebody, they feel like they need to reciprocate with value because because you've provided that value up front. So the principle of scarcity, right? We better get you in soon because I'm actually kind of booked up, for the next couple of weeks, and I've got a couple day windows, and we can get you in there, and we can do this, but we've got to, so there are some principles that you can use as tactics when you're selling a client too. And if you haven't, I highly recommend looking into that book, Influenced by Robert Cialdini. It's a game changer.
Yeah, I really like those tactics that you're saying from that book, Kerry. And I think a tactic or a practice we can also use to transition into methods of losing a client is patience. And when I was starting out really early on, I definitely lacked the patience and the methodology of allowing people the time to breathe. Sometimes you're dealing with like really large sums of money to accomplish this goal, and the person you're dealing with may not have the answer directly themselves. They have to work with their team, etc. So having that patience just shows the professionality of your business and who you are. And I think in getting better in that has allowed myself personally to land larger bids accompanied with these other tactics.
Absolutely. And one other question I would ask, if you do find yourself being impatient, because I think I was the same way, Ian. I was kind of waiting for that answer, and I was real, yeah, for sure. What are you doing in the meantime? Instead of sitting there white knuckling it and waiting for a response, and if it is the check, that's a little different. Waiting on that final payment. Sometimes it's hard to avoid that anxiety, but what are you doing in the meantime? What could you be doing to line up, get another project lined up in the pipeline, or another means of getting that income in the meantime? Just something to consider.
Definitely. Another point, like touching up on patience and stuff like that, that could also, during this communication phase of like in between back and forth with clients, you can, with no patience, you can make assumptions on some part of the project instead of asking your client, and that could be a big no-no, right? Like that's definitely bad. And on these points to losing clients, over-promising and under-delivering is one that comes top of head most of the times. What do you guys? Yeah. What do you think, Kerry, on that one?
Personally, I always try to over deliver. It's just that if I can do that little bit of extra, I think that gives me a degree of separation between me and competitors that, obviously I want to stay within the scope of work and everything I set out in the beginning with that client. But if I can do a little bit better job than, that I never want to do the minimum standard, but if I can do just a little bit better, I think that gives me that degree of separation and makes me stick out in my client's mind. So I always try to do that. But, as far as over-promising, I don't think that you should ever over-promise with a client, but I do think that you should challenge yourself. So the reason I say that is because I have said yes to things that I wasn't 100% prepared for, or maybe I didn't have 100% of the knowledge about what all would go into it, but I committed to it and then was able to make it happen. And then I picked up a high value skill set in the process. And I was also able to meet the needs of that client. That I say that to say that I've also had the opposite experience, right, where I've recently where I've straight up, man, I committed to a thing that I thought were within my capacity, and my skill set. And I misjudged some of those variables and it failed miserably, and it was one of the worst experiences I've had on set with a client. And I was able to, because I was so focused on facilitating and nurturing that relationship with that client, I was able to show up the next day after we had a monumental failure with equipment and a service that we were using for this project. I was able to come back in the next day, take ownership of the failure that had occurred, and provide next steps, suggest next steps to not only not only complete the project, but to make it better than it would have been had the initial attempt succeeded. So again, that's a long explanation for a very short question, Manny, but I don't believe in overpromising. If you overpromise, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're making failure the standard, and you have to overshoot failure in order to deliver. But if you commit to something and you truly believe it's within your capacity and within your limitations, I say commit and over deliver on that thing.
If you have the balls to do it, do it.
Yeah, and you know your capabilities. Like you know what you're able to pull off in the sense of something you haven't done before. Right, you know your confidence level, and you can boost that up. But it's also a knowledge thing, that we're in a creative field, an experience thing. And like, had you not done those things, Kerry, like you're right, you would have never gained that super vital experience of learning something, and also developing kind of like a thicker skin of like, we're in a creative world. Like nothing is set science to an extent. Like. We go in, we make something out of, light and people and etc. And it becomes a product. Like that's in itself pretty crazy. So how the hell did that come into be without people just going out there and being like, yeah, you stand there, I'm going to put the camera at you, the light's going to hit you like this, and I think it's going to work.
And we're going to click the red button.
And then boom, movie's made.
You've got to have a high risk, a high tolerance for risk. It has to be there, but you can't go gambling a project on something that you have no idea about. If you do that, the likelihood of failure and the likelihood that you're gonna screw up that relationship you've been working so hard to build with that client is going to be very high. That percentage is going to be very high, and that's just not a good thing. But one thing real quick about what you said, Ian, is that you have to be honest with yourself about your capabilities and about your limitations. There is no room for like ego and arrogance in that equation.
It's like, what do you know? Like, do you know like that you can handle this, or that you have like the right gear there? It's just like you're saying, like know about yourself and what you're capable of before.
And if you do, be confident about it. Most of the times, like when you like Kerry says, when you commit and you put that foot forward in a solid stride, you're most likely going to be in a better step, right?
Yeah, people definitely feel or can read that as well. Like I imagine that instance you had, and then you coming back and like stating what occurred, like only helped the strengthen that bond, because like, oh man, he's like trying to do things beyond not scope, but what he expected to occur, and is gonna man up to it, and we'll just make it again.
And that was a part of the end result, hands down. Like, because we had that honest evaluation, that honest conversation about what happened, and we made the necessary fixes for the issues we had, the end result of that project was a massive success. After the massive failure, and once we came back and kind of reevaluated and attacked it again, it was a massive success. But it took that smaller failure first to get to the other side, to get to the point where we were like, okay, now we've worked out the bugs, we've worked out the kinks, and we're good to go. And then we were able to have a successful version of that first run. Versus having a nightmare situation
just
Mm-hmm.
go even way
Way
dark to the
worse.
hellhole,
Yeah.
being like
Yeah.
ignoring the client's needs and then going
Yeah.
radio silent, not hearing
Yeah.
any feedback, and acting like they were the ones that were fucked up. No, that they could
And
go.
and
It all depends
and
on your
losing
mindset
out.
too.
Yep, and losing out on any future prospect of doing business with that person again, which is, not what we want, especially for our good clients. We want to keep working with our good clients. So we don't want to lose our good. So what else? What else are we talking about, Manny, when it comes to losing, or how not to lose clients? I guess.
Well, I touched on those, like ignoring the client's needs that you didn't do, like just touching your points on that, and one that we missed is basically like missing deadlines, or just being late for meetings, like not those type of things. It's like just the communication aspect of things. You have to keep in touch. You have to be aware. You have to keep up to date. Keep up with the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, all these small things that seem so like minuscule to somebody else you've never met before giving you money. And again, for something that's like not necessarily a physical asset, they're taking a risk. So like give them the benefit of the doubt, hit those deadlines. If you set a deadline, especially if they set a deadline, maybe there's some negotiation there that you've developed in your contract or whatever. But yeah, I think those little things can certainly lead to creating a nightmare client or down the path of parting ways.
Yeah, it's like creating a standard for yourself that matches the expectation of your ideal clients, right? Who do they, based on what you've found out and what you know about that client, who do you think they want to work with? Okay, are you that person? No. What do you need to do to become that person? Or if you are that person, start figuring out how to get in front of them. Do you have network connections that can, get you a meeting with somebody who can introduce you to the marketing manager? Find, if you do match that expectation, start finding ways to get in the door. If you don't, then maybe start implementing some of the things we've talked about today, which is branded proposals, all these other things, right?
It's almost like you're applying that reverse analysis on your own business before you approach the big client, the good client, right? It's like, let me make sure I got all these things covered, and then let me see to contact this.
It's definitely reverse engineering. Who do I want to work with? Okay, now what do I need to have in place for me in order to get in front of that person and to win that client, right?
So guys, once you found and done your reverse engineering tactic of analyzing how to get in front of these good clients, how do we find out pricing, or how do we talk about pricing with them?
Yeah, I think pricing is such a hard ordeal to go through again in the creative process, because you're never really sure sometimes when you're first starting out what your price points should be. You're seeing other people out there and their price points may seem like insane and that you could never reach those price points, but it's certainly a journey that all of us go on as creatives, in the sense that don't feel negative that your price points may be lower when you first start out, because that's just natural. Again, if you think you're going to come out the door hot, like making what the top professionals are, that's a little bit overzealous. I think for my experience was doing research, looking at how others were handling pricing was helpful, and then also just looking at what work I was producing, and that compared to other people of the same caliber of work is always a good kind of like first step. Like look at who's in your realm, and then maybe a little bit above you, and if they have prices available, maybe start pricing comparably. There's certainly market research out there to view online about price points for video and photography, but it's an individual journey, I would say.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier, Ian, about letting your work speak for itself when you're courting clients, or when you're trying to find that ideal client. And I think when I started out, I worked for free. I reached out to contacts who had a need for what I was doing, which at the time was, digital media production and videography and photography and things like that. And I went out there and tried to make the best version of what I was doing at the time that I could for those people, so that I would then have work, a portfolio, some assets to shop around to other prospective clients, and actually tried to get paid for that work, right? And then and again, starting at those super low price points, where I was gonna get the yes from that person because it was just too much value to say no to. But after you've done that a little while and really honed in the craft, and you've gotten some work lined up for yourself, then you have to start accounting for other factors in your pricing, right? Because your work is going to change. It's going to improve. You're going to get more efficient. It's going to take you less time to do. So all of these things will become factors that you have to start thinking about with pricing. But again, the market also began to dictate my pricing in the beginning as well. It was, I was getting a lot of yeses in the beginning because my price point was very low. And then as my work began to improve and I got more efficient in the software and was able to add different elements, I started to raise my prices. And I got to a point where people were not willing to pay that price for my work. And that's when I knew that I was kind of at the right place, where I was still getting, people were like, yeah, this is great. We're in. But there were also people who were like, I was starting to weed out some of those bad clients, right? Where they were like, that's a little high for me. I might, could blah, blah, blah. And that's where you refer them to somebody else who is maybe still at that level where they're just trying to get guys in the door, right? So you can, again, that pro move where I personally can't, help you with this project, but I can refer you to a guy who's a specialist in this or whatever. So the market will have a role to play in your pricing too, especially in those beginning stages.
Yeah, and working for free as a door opener for your journey, there's nothing wrong about that. But also learn how to kind of not always work for free, find that experience, gain that value, and then from there, work on I would call it your set floor price. And then from there have that base where it's like, all right, nothing lower than this. And then you keep moving, right?
Yeah, I think sticking to some type of standard once you've established what that is vital, because then and also you taking very adequate records of once you've established your business and worked with a bunch of clients or a few clients, you can monitor and track the growth. 2 years ago I was charging so and so amount for this, and now just factoring, like we're saying, the market, economy, gear being added, you can look back and say, well, if it was that then it definitely shouldn't be that now. There has to be an increase. And that's not who are you justifying that to? Yourself. Like, you don't have to show that to anybody, but yeah, your measurable growth gives you, I think, strength in being able to throw out that big number and being like, yeah, I'm not just making this up. This is something that is from an equation. Like it or not, that's what I've measured. So, you want to have some logic backing up those points besides other people's notions. That's developed through, monitoring growth and progress.
Through time, through expertise, and through having a process where you did your small steps all the time until you got to mastering your pricing or your whole process. So it's all a matter of, like you said, patience.
And what's the potential value that a client stands to gain based off of the work that you deliver? I think that's another massive question. If you're charging $1,500, $2,000 for a creative campaign that's gonna yield hundreds of thousands of dollars for your client, you may need to reevaluate your pricing for that client, right? So again, there's a case by case variable here too, where you need, again, when you research that client and when you learn more about the project that they're bringing you on for, and it comes time to quote them, try to, again, reverse engineer how much do they stand to make from your work, and because that should be considered when you're putting together that pricing for them as well.
I mean, they're certainly thinking about that, right? Like they're thinking about what their percentage is that they're going to make off your product.
The ROI.
Yeah, what's their return on interest? This is business
investment.
So, investment. So be cognizant of that and the value, like Kerry's saying, of your work, because not that they're taking advantage of it again, but they will use it to the best of their ability. So
they want the best deal.
They want the best deal, like anybody in the world does. So get the best deal for yourself, because nobody's going to fight for you if you don't, stand up for yourself either.
Absolutely.
And all you're doing on communicating that best deal on that ROI and letting them know that 10% of their return will make them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it will cost them $20,000 rather than $2,000 what you were charging.
Yeah.
You just made $18,000 because you really analyzed and assessed your client to find out what they needed, and you're just backing up their points. You know what I mean?
And honestly, if you're working with a client that has that kind of budget, or they're running a campaign of that size, chances are they have that tolerance for that level of fee. Yeah, for sure. I've worked with some brands who were prepared to put that kind of money behind the advertising that we created. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars, for media placement for the creative. If they've got that kind of budget for deploying of the media, they've got some bandwidth for the production. So, so just I would definitely keep that in mind. And again, that's all about the evaluation that you do up front about your client.
Right. Yeah, because I think a good client understands that too. Right.
For sure.
Maybe a not so professional client or bad client would try to take advantage of that and be like, well, we just want to get the most ROI on this as possible. Whereas a good client gets that, and like we're saying, like $100,000 campaign, $5,000 is a drop in the bucket. For them, it's not that much. So even if your work you don't feel is that valuable, it is to somebody. Take advantage of that, or else the money's left on the table. And that's such a bad feeling. It makes me cringe every time I think of that possibly happening.
Yeah, and one other rookie thing that I did, I had a pretty negative experience when I was first getting started, is account for all of your, and this goes back to your meticulous record keeping, Ian. Always account for your expenses first, and build from there, because when I was first starting out, I didn't know that budgets were allocated to projects and things like that. I wasn't thinking about accounting for all of my expenses first. I was just thinking about that top line dollar amount that I was charging that client. So
and there was much more business aspects that you were missing out on, right? And then later they come back to bite in the ass. It's like, oh well, you remember about these
right? Yeah.
Charges.
And, just don't. What I'm saying is, don't dig into your own margin to facilitate a project for a client. Make sure all of those expenses are covered up front, and make sure the client, and be transparent with the client about those things. To Ian's point, being meticulous about, record keeping and having line items that are expenses for you, and being transparent with those things to the client. That's all, those are all best practices, and a good way to have all that covered. 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, again, thinking at the corporate level of, bidding out for things, that's why I always say overbid, because a lot of these, hundreds of thousands of dollars in budget dollars for these projects, it's also overbid. Sometimes they don't even use all that money. Like they're just doing it as a safety precaution for themselves. So why shouldn't you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like shit happens. You have to buy these things that didn't come into play, and maybe it's covered again by your contract, your proposal, but maybe it's not. And now you're stuck fronting that bill. You're fucked. Like you are now, right? The worst place you can be in is in a project that's not a passion project, is making zero, or,
Yeah,
oh God, losing
absolutely.
money. Yeah. Then you got a real problem. But,
I think we've all kind of
things
encountered
happen.
some of those.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, investment of your time, investment of your equipment and resources. If you get paid zero, then you are negative. You have lost money because you've
For
you've
sure.
invested your time, which is worth.
Valuable. Yeah. That's unmeasurable.
Yeah. So as far as homework assignment for this episode, like go get Influenced by Robert Cialdini and read it, and it's gonna, one, blow your mind, but two, there are some perspective shifts that happened for me in that book, that really were, took me leaps and bounds ahead of where I was, as far as, being able to influence a decision, or, influence a client to move them from the consideration of working with me to saying yes to a project. So, man, Influenced by Robert Cialdini, it's a game changer.
I think I would add having a good filtration system set in place, or having that process, thinking about those methods that you can implement into your own service, format, questionnaire, if it's a form, if it's your cold calling, method, like Kerry likes to do. Everyone has their own way, so just refine those skills of having these contracts. I think, Ian, you were mentioning it only costs like $50 on Fiverr to get a licensed
Yeah.
contract, so why not put those things in place, especially with things like COVID happening, liability. We didn't really touch on this, but there's a big segment into going back to work and being, liability. Your liability and all these waivers have to be as an amendment or addendums in your contract. So that's a big thing. Look into that. We
Yeah,
have
I think
we can drop some links as well. If you guys reach out directly, and we can give you some great insight and PDFs that the industry has been launching to us and sharing, because we're all a community. We're all here to help each other and to produce better things together.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of assets out there that I've definitely found that we could put up. Um, yeah, I think for takeaways, I really like the concept of forming this avatar for your perfect client. I think that's a really good starting point. Being able to look at yourself and say, who do I want to work with? Even if you're just starting, it's a really good launch pad for you to set up that profile of, well, I want to do this type of video. And it could be anything. It could be, I want to do wedding videos. Well, like, what does the perfect bride look like? I want to do music videos. Who does the perfect artist look like? I just want to do conferences. Well, how does that conference look to your perfect client? I think that's a really good step to take, because it allows you to get on track right from the get-go and say, okay, it's only this segment, or if you want to do it all, even, then you can really separate out those templates that you'll create, and make sure that you're approaching them in the right way, because you don't want to start off all disorganized and not knowing what that avatar looks like, because then that avatar just becomes jumbled up through the need for money, and you're taking on clients at whatever whim, and now you don't have that singular avatar that you can work towards, where if you do it right off the bat, you have a clear perspective goal. And I think that's a pretty easy practice to do. I mean, I could form an avatar right now off of what my business was like when I started, and it wasn't nearly as clear as it is now. Like, I know who that person is. I know how then I could price out the bids that he'll give to me, and I'm actually pretty sure I know what his personality or her personality is going to be like to mesh with me best. So I'd say go out, or not even go out, stay in, do that at home. It's a lot easier than one would think.
Yeah, and just as kind of a closing thought here too, I think it's important to cover again that a lot of times we create the nightmare clients by not implementing processes and not putting down clear guidelines in black and white to keep a project or a client on the rails. And if we do those things, we can turn a client into a dream client because we've given them the framework to be our dream client, right? So I think it's important to remember that what we do and what we don't do can either create the nightmare client or turn a client into an ideal client. We have that power as the creative professional.
Yeah. To piggyback on that, I totally agree. I think that's a great closing statement. This is on you as a creative as much as it is on the client. This is not a us versus them. They're giving you money and you need to mold the relationship. Be prepared for that, to be successful, to be a creative that's able to be professional and make money. No matter what, I think we can all agree you have to be good at molding these relationships and just be honest and in your abilities. And more than likely, you'll find that you'll get into a profitable string of clients if you follow those guidelines to an extent.
So, if you guys want to hear more from the Underexposure team here, please check us out on Instagram at Underexposure Podcast or Facebook at Underexposure Podcast. We're also streaming on all major MP3 platforms, and you can find us on YouTube as well at Underexposure Podcast. If you jump on YouTube and you want to see what our pretty faces look like and our the places where we're filming, check it out on YouTube. Leave us a review there and subscribe. If there's anything you'd like to see us cover in the future episodes, leave it in a comment. If there's something you saw that you liked, call it out on the comment section on YouTube, and check us out there as well. We have, again, just a ton of fun, and we get a ton of value out of doing these podcasts with you guys. So we'd love to hear your feedback and hear what you think about what we're covering in the episodes.
Yeah, more comments. I'd love
Drop
to
the
see.
heat.
I'd love to see some comments on people in the same situation, or if they'd like to hear us talk about something, or just for us to have like a round table about something. I think would be really cool. Yeah, post.
Absolutely. Yeah, keep that feedback coming in. And for episode 3 of Underexposure, I'm Kerry Helton.
Ian Harrington.
And Manny Aqua.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.